Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. I'm your host, Chuck Everson, and my co-host, as always, is the sensational Dr. Sonny Spera. How are you, Sonny?
I'm sensational, Chuck. How are you?
Very good. I have to come up with new adjectives for you, man. I keep trying to work on that. It's tough, you know. It's only so many S words I could use, you know.
And your nose gets a little longer each time, too. I noticed that.
So today is a very special show that holds a lot of meaning for me and anybody who's put the blue and white Villanova uniform on today. Today is all about Coach Massimino. We're getting close to Father's Day, and this is 4 years coming up that we lost Coach, and so we wanted to honor him by talking about him and honoring his life. And I have two really, really good guys to do just that. Two of my teammates from the 1985 national championship team, Sonny. So you're in here. You're in the, like you said a minute ago, we're in the Wildcats den. Don't worry, I'll protect you. These guys are okay. They're not going to hurt you. First guy was a senior captain of the 85 team, and he was one of our leaders, especially on the second team in practice, and he'll go through that. Brian Harrington is with us today. Thank you, Brian, for coming out.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. And this guy, also an 85 national champion, and is a guy that knows Coach Mass pretty well. His middle son, R.C. Massimino, and a very, very good friend, a brother of Brian and I. R.C. Mass is with us today. How are you, Ars?
I'm doing great. Good to see you, Chuck and Sonny.
Good to see you guys. Good to see you, as always. It's always fun when we get together.
RC, I got to tell you, as I see you, I'm like taken aback for a minute. It's like I'm looking at your father.
I'm starting to look a little more like him, Sonny. I think
it's really. I mean, all you need to do is do this a little bit. You got it. I mean,
a lot of that tearing off his tie and his jacket. Yeah. That's what it was all about.
Yeah, you got to see this one on YouTube. That's all I can tell the people listening.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So, guys, Ars, you first. Let's go back. So, talk about growing up in the Massimino house for a minute. What that was like. He was the kind of guy that, and everybody knows some of the things that Coach has done and everything. He was one of those guys that made everybody that played for him, everybody part of the Villanova family, as part of his family. So, talk about what it was like to be part of the Massimino family.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. Well, we have 5 kids, and I have 2 older sisters, one older brother and a younger brother, and so I was fourth in line. And it was just, it was fun from our perspective as far as being involved in the Villanova family, being able to go to all the games and all that, being around all the players all the time. But at the same time, he spent a lot of time at Villanova and with the practices and with the guys, and how dedicated he was to the team. But he spent a lot of time, obviously, with his own family, and he was a demanding father, just like he was with the team. He wanted you to always work hard. He was always asking you about your grades and seeing how you're doing, and are you working hard with your basketball or baseball or whatever it is you might be doing. And by the way, he was a really good baseball player at Vermont. So he was really into that game. But, he would come home and, just like we would always do as a team, it was all about having dinner together. Everybody always having to be at the dinner table. My mother used to ring the bell. You'd come running in from the neighborhood, and you sat down, and we all had pasta. I got to tell you, we grew up eating pasta every single day, and that's not a lie. It's you always had pasta with something, right? You had pasta with a little piece of chicken, pasta with a little piece of meat, whatever it might be. But we had pasta every day, and my mother could cook it 12 different ways, because she learned from the best, my father's mother. But we enjoyed our time together as a family, and that was the most important time when we sat down. He got back from practice. We sat down and we had dinner together, and then we would spend time at night. And a lot of times we'd watch film or watch games, and that kind of kept everybody together. But it was great.
I want to ask you a question because you brought it up because and just in being an outsider, but understanding a little bit of some of the things I've learned from all the Nova guys and people that we've spoken to and getting to know some guys a little bit better is they tell, the family and the culture and how that, because the word family gets abused sometimes, but for you guys, it's a way of life. And I wanted to ask you about, like, you already mentioned it, your grandmother. Talk about how that was instilled in the family core of the Massimino house, because then it just had to be the extension of that. How did that all start?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it started with his family. I mean, his mother and father both came over from Italy. I think his mother came over when she was 10 or 11. His father came over maybe when he was 8. He was a shoemaker. They didn't have a lot of money. He worked, literally made shoes, fixed shoes, had the little shoe shop below the house in Hillside, New Jersey. And he was, I think, a tough guy. He didn't really understand sports. His mother didn't understand sports. My father actually went to the Juilliard school and played the piano, believe it or not.
Wow.
My grandmother, my father was playing football. That's a great story, right? My father was playing football. His mother and father had no idea what that sport was. My grandmother finds out that he's about to miss his practice for his piano lesson. She comes down to the football field, grabs him by his ear, and pulls him off the field and says, "Roland, you're not playing football. You're coming to play the piano." So he struggled with that. He convinced his mother that sports were important in his life, and that's kind of what got him going in it. But yeah, I think it comes from that root, right? It comes from the Italian roots, the Italian heritage, and how family was always very important to them. And they had 2 kids. They actually had 4 kids. Two died when they were very young. So they really only had him and his brother, and they were a very tight knit group. And it was important, and that's what he learned. And he instilled that on us and all of you guys, Brian and Chuck, from the beginning with the Villanova family. I mean, he wanted a relationship with these kids, right? I mean, you asked Harold Presley. Harold Presley was a guy. Harold to this day will say that he came to Villanova because my father said, this isn't a 4-year commitment. This is a commitment for the rest of your life. I'm gonna be with you, and I'm gonna be calling you, and we're gonna be together for the rest of your life. So that's just something that he really, really believed in, and I think he really followed up in. I mean, I'll tell you, Christmas morning, Sonny, he would be on the phone all morning. I mean, because he would get in his book and he would call all the guys, and he would make sure that he touched base with all the guys and said Merry Christmas, and that kind of stuff to him was really, really important. It wasn't just something that they talked about, or like you're saying, it wasn't a word that was just thrown around.
Yeah, he lived it. I mean, it's so obvious. It just comes out of everybody's pores.
Yeah,
it's natural.
Yep. Yeah, it's great.
His whole family concept and loyalty was the other thing that he was really
absolutely right.
Is the foundation of the current culture that is at Villanova even to this day. I mean, I think that's part of his legacy is that Jay was with us the other day. We had him on, and he talked about how important Coach was to him and setting up the culture at Villanova currently. He said it's 80 to 90% of the stuff that he learned from Coach Mass, and then it goes in and out. Brian, how did you feel when how do you think it was with Coach as far as being a player on the team? Was he accessible? I mean, were you able to go in and stop at the house and have something to eat as part of the family? And how did that play into you coming to Villanova? And was that a big reason why you chose Villanova?
Well, Chuck, you may remember the story, and maybe you don't based on that question, but long story short, I was a walk-on at Villanova my 4 years there. And right. The only reason I went to Villanova is because the only school I got into. It was I had only one direction, and when I went, quite frankly, I went with the intention of transferring. And I had a high school basketball coach who put the fear of God in me, and he said, "If you don't try out for that team, I'll never speak to you again." And kind of the fast forward the story, I try out with 100 other guys and was fortunate to make it. He took myself and another guy, Mike Enright, that year. But once we made it, he immediately embraced us. You know, we were a part of the family from day one. He did not treat us any differently. You know, he was as demanding, but he was also as loving and as concerned. You know, and RC, you know, brought up the Christmas Day phone calls. You know, he made hundreds of phone calls on Christmas morning. And my parents got one. And they were floored by that my freshman year. And that went on for, you know, the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, I never felt like a walk-on because he never treated me like a one. You know, it was all, you know, we were all in it together. Wherever we went as a group. Everybody treated each other with respect, and you know the demands were high always, but that was just what was expected. So,
I don't think we've ever used the word walk on really when we're talking about guys like you and some of the other guys that were filled that role. I don't recall anybody ever using that term, and
because nobody did.
That's why I asked the question the way I did. I didn't even use it.
No. I know. Yeah, nobody did. It's it was it was seamless. Which was, you know, for me, it was really nice because I, you know, assimilated really quickly into, you know, a group of guys that were highly recruited. And, you know, so it was good. I was very fortunate, you know, to have coaches, not only as a coach, but as quite frankly, a mentor for 4 years. And then, you know, a guy that I would really go to for guidance for the balance of my life.
Yep.
RC, I got to ask you a few questions now. We're getting a little bit into the Villanova culture here. Now, we talked to Coach Boeheim, and one of the biggest things we talked about, he brought up a lot, was about coaching his sons. So I want to ask you, and Chuck hasn't said anything about it other than he has kind of a thought, but you're playing for your dad, right? You got your teammates alongside of you, and you have your father. So I know in a family, when my brother and sister mess up, I'm not telling mom and dad, right? So how were you able to balance that? And then I have another part of the question. Let's start with that first. How were you able to balance that?
I mean, I knew where I stood as far as that was concerned, and I don't think he expected me to, you know, to be the kind of person who was going to ever talk to him about anything. I mean, I was part of the team. I was one of the guys. Like Brian's saying, I think everybody accepted me, even though I was the coach's son. And, you know, I obviously looked at myself as a player, right? I didn't look at myself as his son in that respect. So, you know, everybody on the team, I think, trusted that I wasn't going to say anything or do anything if someone stepped out of line, you know, off the court or something were to happen. But that really wasn't a difficult thing for me because, you know, he never looked to me to say anything to him. Never, ever did he ask me a question about, you know, what happened last night or what, you know, give me, you know, let me know what happened. But that was never came up. And I never thought to talk about it with him. So I don't think that ever really became an issue. I mean, I could see how it becomes an issue. And as far as my father, there was a lot less pressure. The only pressure he ever got with me was from my mother about playing time. You know, Buddy Boeheim.
That was my second half of the question. I'm going to get that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different story with Buddy Boeheim. Buddy Boeheim's a player, you know, and he's probably the best player on that team compared to me that, you know, didn't play a whole lot during my career.
You know, Sonny, just if I can jump in on that question, RC, it's, you know, it's a function of trust, right? And you know, real soon or real early, if trust is established or not, because there were so many things that happened that RC could have shared, forget about with his dad, could have shared with an assistant coach, you know, or something, and never did. So that, you know, trust was established, and that was, you know, a function of RC keeping everybody's confidence. So it, you know, from my perspective, sitting on the other side of that fence, it was never even a thought that I couldn't express a thought or a concern, and it was going to go anywhere but that locker room. So,
and I never really, I'm sorry, I'm just saying, I never really felt the pressure because it was never even I wasn't ever being pressured from the other side. And I never felt like there was any reason why I would ever share anything anyway.
Yeah. We almost forgot really that you were his son at times because you were just
absolutely
one of us, you know, and you know,
we all were sweating. We're all getting screamed at the same time.
Hey, he was an equal opportunity yeller. There's no doubt about that, man. And you know, the other thing is to tie into that too. It goes both ways. Like I'm I'm sure you're sitting at the dinner table one day and he's gotten frustrated with Everson or Maker or both of us, and maybe said something in frustration over a meal or something, but you never shared that with anybody. I mean, and that was something, so it was both ways. There was trust, with you and him and with you and us. And I take my hat off to you, because it couldn't have been easier. There's no way that was an easy.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
But you did it better than anybody. I couldn't think of another guy that could do it like that. I mean, that was really great how you handled that.
So let me ask you another question. Second part of the question, and you already jumped to your mom. That's where I'm going to go with this one, because I've coached both my girls, and I've had my wife in my ear a few times, like, "Hey, stop being a coach and start being a father." So, let's say the situation is you're unhappy about something on the team. Maybe it's playing time, whatever. Usually it's playing time. It's always playing time, right? It's something, and you're upset, and your mom feels it. Did you ever get your mom in your ear or your mom in your dad's ear? How was that dynamic for you?
Not really. My mother was the best when it came to like supporting the team and supporting the guys. And she was the person that would lead the party when everybody came over the house, but she didn't really stick her nose into that business, quite honestly. Okay. I mean, she
that's safe. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I don't want to say like use the words, she knew her place, but, because she was a strong woman, but she wasn't the type of person that was going to, step in and say, "I think you're doing this wrong or that, or why don't you try this or try that." She would talk about, the guys with him, and she would talk about the games and things like that. But, I don't think she ever really wanted to talk about, "I think you ought to do this or you ought to do that." I didn't really hear that come out of her mouth very often. And I never really talked. I wasn't going to get her in between me and my father. That was for sure. So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to ask you, the next part is, when you graduated, did they confide in you, say, "Boy, that was really tough when you were playing for your father"? Was that?
I think he really enjoyed it. I think he enjoyed the fact that we were able to be together for the championship. I mean,
That's
that
awesome.
was, I think he really thought that was a great thing, that the family was together and that I was able to be a part of it. And I don't think he would have given that up for anything. But it wasn't. I know he didn't think it was an easy time at times. And he used to always joke about how my mother would get in his ear and tell him I had to play a little bit. But he had no pressure that way with me, so that was not so hard.
While you're on that subject, RC, talk about that for a second. The iconic photo. It's one of my favorite pictures of that whole run that we had in '85. Is you and Coach hugging each other after that North Carolina game for the Final Four. Talk about the significance of that moment. History that built up to that point, and how you were feeling, the jubilation and everything that we went through.
Yeah, I mean, everybody sees that photo and they think that photo was from the national championship game, because how excited and how happy we were. But that was like Chuck just said, after the North Carolina game, and it was such a huge moment in his life and in our family's life, because he had gotten to that Final Eight like 4 times, and lost to North Carolina and lost to we lost to Houston, and I think we might have lost to North Carolina twice. I don't know. You probably know that better than I do, Chuck. But it was we lost to some really good teams, and we never really could get over the hump. And that was just such a huge event for the team, for Villanova, for our family. That, I mean, I just remember just grabbing him and him grabbing me, and I mean, it was just an unbelievable moment. I mean, and that moment there was probably equally as great as when we won the championship, just because getting over the hump, like he used to always say, you just got to get over the hump. You got to find a way. And, that team found a way that day. I'm sure we could talk about the pasta speech, but, and he used to always say, the only reason that team's better than you is because they have North Carolina on their jersey. If you guys had North Carolina on the front of your jersey, you'd be considered a better team than they are, because, it was always about, not having the respect. You know, I mean, when we went, you guys remember when we went to Kentucky, they didn't know no one knew where Villanova was. They, you know, you had all the people in the airport, the police, the different people saying, "Where is Villanova? Who's Villanova?" You know, no one ever. You know, we ended up with the smallest hotel out in the boondocks. You know, I don't even know what that was, a Motel 8 or something.
Ramada Inn.
The Ramada Inn.
Yeah.
You know what? I would be curious to know, and I don't know if you guys know this, but how many father-son national champions do we have? A father coaching a son for a national championship. Can't be many.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Can't be many.
Yeah, I don't know. Did Rick Pitino's son play for him when they won the national championship?
You know what?
I think so.
That's a great question. I'd like to.
Pete Maravich and his dad when he was at LSU.
Yeah,
did they win the national championship?
I don't think so.
I don't think they did.
No, I don't.
So Brian, let me ask you a couple questions. So when you get to Villanova as a walk-on, or were you? Because we talked to Wolfie, and he talked about as he came in as a manager, he felt he was recruited, like he had to be. Yeah. He had the inside track. Did you have any inclination, or was it literally, listen, I'm a guy off the street, and I'm going to try out against all these guys? Did Coach Mass know you beforehand? How'd that work out?
No, what happened? I mentioned my high school coach,
right?
And you know, he knew Mitch Bonaguro, who was one of our assistants.
Okay. Yeah.
So the summer before, he got me a job at coach's camp up in the Poconos.
Okay. Yep.
So I spent a week in some hut somewhere. There was 100 degrees, and you know, I don't think I know I didn't meet Coach, but I was there and got to know Mitch a little bit, and another assistant, Marty Marbach. But you know, really, I went. It's a long story on how it all happened, but you know, Marty Marbach really encouraged me to try out after playing, you know, for 4 or 5 weeks until that October 15th date. So no, it was not my intention to play basketball at Villanova. It was just really just to go and be a student. And then, you know, I didn't want to hear my high school coach yell at me for anymore. So I kind of just did it. Just did it.
Okay. How now I guess this will come back to RC, because you mentioned Marty and some of the other coaches we've had on and we've talked to. Talk about how they became part of the family. Now, was there more pressure on them? They had to be the uncles. I mean, how was it structured?
I mean, yeah, they just had to work their ass off and do do whatever.
If they were the uncles, they were the crazy ass uncles.
Yeah,
Jay Wright said that. Yeah.
They were not the loving uncles. Great guys, but not.
Yeah, I mean, you know, every one of them had to prove themselves. I got to tell you, you know, with my father. I mean, I know. Whitey Rigsby's father, when Whitey Rigsby was recruited, his father was a sign maker, and he made a sign on the back of my father's desk that said "the disposition to dominate." And you know, growing up, I didn't really understand, right, the disposition to dominate. But when you think about that, it's actually a pretty cool thing and saying, and that's kind of a little bit of his makeup. You know, he was just the guy that just always wanted to win, always wanted to find a way to win. And he demanded those assistants, you know, work their ass off. I mean, whether it was recruiting or films, you know, meeting with the guys, making sure that they were, you know, going to class. You know, those assistants, I don't know that if they do all those kinds of things now. There's so many guys in these organizations now where they have all these, you know, dobos and you know, all these junior assistants and all these different guys, you know, associates. And back in the days when we were there, those assistants had to do everything. They had to wake the guys up in the morning. They had to get the guys to run in the morning. They had to, you know, watch film, recruit. I mean, they were doing everything. So, yeah, they were. You're right. They were probably the crazy uncles, Brian. But they had to prove that they were worthy to work in that organization, and they had to prove that they were willing to work hard enough. And those guys did. I mean, guys like Mitch Bonaguro, he worked his ass off, and Marty, and Pete Gillen was there back in those days, and Mike Fratello, another great name, another great guy. Those guys all came from the Villanova system and all worked under my father, and they're all very successful guys because they worked really hard, and I mean, look at Jay Wright. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, he's the most successful guy of them all.
You just named the Mount Rushmore of the Massimino assistant coaches, I think, Yeah. Now, speaking of crazy uncles, Sonny, Brian Harrington became a crazy uncle. He wound up being a coach my senior year. Brian went from being teammate to coach. How was that transition, Brian, on your side of it?
Yeah, it was an interesting transition. I mean, I'll put it this way. I had a great love for the game of basketball. And to RC's comments, I found out I didn't have a great love for the business of basketball. And those are two very distinct, different things. Yeah. So, I had the good fortune where Coach invited me to be an assistant, grad assistant for a couple of years. And after 2 years, I called him, and then we sat down, and I said, look, I don't think this is for me. If I have to work as hard as you do and all these other assistants for the rest of my life in this business, I want to love basketball. And I just didn't love it anymore that way. And I remember him saying, like, what do you want to do? And we had this, what seemed to me, 2-hour conversation about life. And it basically closed with, well, however I can help you, I will be here to help you. And he was throughout my entire life. And, maybe we'll get into some things about the foundation later on that we started together. But he never said no to me, ever. So it was lucky.
So you went from a player to an employee.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so that transition was his treatment, like he had to treat you different. Was it more demanding? Talk about
it was more demanding.
Right.
It was more demanding because Coach was a guy who rarely had an off switch, and I didn't see him when we went home, but we would be in it early in the morning, late at night. He cost me 2 or 3 girlfriends because I had to keep canceling things. But it was such a great learning experience. I mean, I got to drive him around during the summer to go recruiting into camps, and spent a lot of time with him. But he was always thinking about his team, and not just X's and O's. He was thinking about how to make guys better as people, how he could help them. And he didn't, I respectfully and affectionately say he really didn't have an off switch because he cared. He had a visceral, need to help people. And, that's what drove him. It was, he was a fierce competitor and he wanted to win, but he knew the wins would come if he made everybody better. And he was going to do his darndest to make everybody better. And that doesn't mean, berating them. That means just helping them along. And, he was a coach, but I always look at him more as a teacher than a coach.
Right.
Because he broke everything down to fundamentals.
To that degree, let me ask both you guys this, because we never really have talked about this subject that much, he, obviously he's a great X's and O's coach. Yeah. And if you get a chance, we never lost a first round NCAA game, because if you gave him 4 or 5 days to prepare for anybody, it was a W, so I'm not even going down that road, but he was a master at motivating people. He was a master motivational guy. There's millions of stories about taking guys on the side and talk to them and things like that. So where do you think that comes from? And how would you say, and some of the stuff he would use, he would know the exact right thing to say. When you're talking about pasta in the middle of a game, how the hell did anybody think that was going to motivate guys? Talk about that, RC, about how he motivated us, on and off the court.
Yeah, I mean, where it came from is a really good question, Chuck. Honestly, I mean, he grew up around some great coaches. Hubie Brown was from the North Jersey area, and like I said before, a guy like Fratello, but those guys, I think he really, watched a lot of those, the Hubie Brown type guys and those older guys that kind of taught him, what it was like to win basketball or to coach basketball. And as far as, I think it was just in him, honestly, as far as his motivational skills. I mean, he was a tough guy. He was a competitor. Like I said, he played the piano. He went to Juilliard school. He wanted to be the best. His parents pushed him to be the best. He played baseball. He was a really good baseball player. He's in the Hall of Fame, I think, in Vermont for their baseball too.
Yeah.
So I mean, he worked really hard at what he did, and I'm sure he was coached well along the way. And the thing that I would say about him more than anything is, he yelled and screamed at us, and I can still hear him yelling, "Get on the line, get on the line." We used to run suicide, Sonny, like you can't believe, if we weren't doing the right thing in practice. I mean, and that thing would just ring in your head, "Get on the line," and we would all look at each other like, "Here we go." But the difference was, when he was done, he'd give you a hug. It was when it was over. If you did something in the basketball game, that turnover or something, he'd yell and scream and tell you, "What the hell are you doing?" And he'd sit your ass down on the bench. But then he'd come back to you and he would give you a hug and he would tell you he loves you, and he would tell you to get back in there and believe in yourself and understand how good you are. And those are the kind of talks he would have with people in his office. You got to understand how good you are. And he would have those talks in private, but people saw the ranting and raving and the upset. But you would also see him give a guy a hug when it was over. And then that's the difference. There's a lot of guys out there today that yell and scream, but they're missing the other half of it. They're missing the love, and that's where there's a disconnect with some of these young kids. They just don't get the other half of it, which he was really good at. He was really good at both.
I think he really knew his players too, Ars. He knew which guys he could yell at. He knew which guys he may have taken a little bit of a different kind of attack. Like, I know he treated Jensen a little bit different than some of the other guys with the way he handled things that Harold went through.
I think that's a good point. You're right.
What were you going to say, Brian?
He also had some very thick skin, because I remember one practice. It was my senior year, and I'm feeling it. I'm having a really good practice, and coach is getting pissed at for some reason at the defense, and he grabs me like by the jersey and looks at everybody else, and he starts yelling, "Are you kidding me? Are you going to let this high school Harry do that during this practice?" He goes, "You guys should be embarrassed." And I'm like, I felt like saying, "Coach, I'm standing right here." And so
He used that word too, that high school Harry. That's great.
Yeah, but then to RC's point, he knew he knew what everybody could take, and I knew the point he was making, so I wasn't offended. But when he was done screaming at everybody, he turned and he whispered. He's like, "Nice job." There was always the yin and yang to it, but it was just sometimes when you're on the receiving or giving or whatever end, it was kind of comical, at the same time.
You guys mentioned some of his expressions. Now, for his 80th birthday, we were in it just so coincided with I guess it was the 30th anniversary of our game, and we had a big thing at Villanova. Villanova actually played Northwood, where he was coaching, and we presented to him an idea that your mom had, RC, which I thought was awesome, where we had all of his expressions that he used on this big board. And we presented that to him for his birthday from the team and from the program. Talk about some of the expressions that we can talk about on air that he used to say.
I got one. I mean, and I use it with, I've used it with my two daughters growing up, time and score. He was always trying to teach, during a game, time and score. There's certain times you can do things, but you have to understand the score. And there are other times you can't do things because the score is a little different. And I use that with my girls just about life. There's time and score to life. You have to understand certain times you can do things and certain times you can't. So it's that nuance that he tried to share using that phrase and it sticks me sticks with me to this day. I mean, I use it with my staff when they're talking about things.
No, that's great.
How about you, Art?
He used to always say, the other one was like, the harder you work, the luckier you get. I mean, that was kind of the one. He used to tell that story all the time to the campers about the big guy and the little guy. And the big guy would say that the little guy was always lucky. And he said, he's not lucky. He just works hard. And the harder you work, the luckier you get. And that's another one that I tell our guys all the time too, is, it's all about how you work. It's not about luck. Everybody thinks the guy that's successful is the lucky guy. He's not necessarily that guy.
Right.
I liked the operation was a success, but the guy died.
Right.
We got through the process of whatever we had to do. We ran the play, but we didn't have the result that we wanted. Right. The guy didn't make it. So,
or the other one was, don't be a do nothing.
Yeah.
That would drive him crazy, Sonny. You get in the game and you pass, run around, whatever, but you're not doing anything, right? It's like you can say, yeah, great. Well, he take you out and you say, Coach, I didn't turn the ball over. He said, yeah, but you're a do nothing. Don't be a do nothing. You got to do something.
Yeah.
So that was always a big thing with him.
I used that with when I coached my daughter's teams. The girls would all sit around and stand around and pass the ball. And I'm like, out here, you're a do nothing. Pass it, step up. You got to engage. Right. You sit out here, you're not going to do anything. Nobody's going to cover you. But don't be a do nothing. And there's a bunch of little kids running around Westchester, or what? They're 21-year-old women now, saying don't be a do nothing because of Coach Mass.
Right.
There's a couple other good ones in my head, but I don't know if we're allowed to say them.
Well, you know what? The other thing that jumps out at me is when it's not a saying, but back then, they have the boards now, the dry erase they write on. Back then there were magnets. Right. And he would move these magnets around like a 3-card monte dealer, and they would be flying around so fast, and he'd be banging it, and he'd be like boop 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 boop, easy, and all of a sudden he'd like hit the board, and the magnets would shoot all over the court, and there'd be 4 managers like running around finding these little magnets to put them back together. And I mean, it's kind of an inside joke, but the visual, I still have it at where he was so intense and moving things around that his chessboard, if you will.
Oh my gosh!
To show us.
How about the intensity in some of those?
Oh.
I mean, he would just, and he always, guys now they think a lot before they talk to the team. You see the coaches, they talk for a minute before they sit down. I mean, he would get in that huddle and he would just go boom, boom, boom with every guy and draw up what he wanted to draw up. But he was always had so much intensity in those huddles. Yeah, it was crazy.
Let me ask you, Brian. Let me ask you, and then RC, same question. What's some of your most memorable Coach Mass moments? Sideline, pregame, you name it. What are some of the most memorable moments?
Mine has more to do with my sophomore year. We were playing North Carolina, and we had a few walk-ons that year, so we all didn't travel to every game. But I grew up idolizing North Carolina. And Coach found out about that somehow. And it wasn't my turn to go. But he came to me the day before the game and said, "You're making the trip." And I was like blown away because we played in Carmichael. I think we might have been the last non-ACC team to beat North Carolina in Carmichael. So that is a because he gave me an experience. He gave me the Villanova experience and the experience of a lifetime. But that little kind of micro experience within the larger experience was really special, and it showed that he was understood and was being very thoughtful because he didn't have to do it. That was completely his choice. So,
how about you, RC?
That's a tough question because I was around so many different things, and I was just trying to think of that. But I think just the excitement of every season. Like he was always so excited to get it going. He always wanted that first practice, and it was always fun to be around those first few days. And he would go after it and really get guys motivated, jump up and down. And it was always fun to have that new season because I know he always had a lot of energy and was like, "Come on, guys!" He would get everybody kind of fired up. And I also remember, I also remember the end of every year. It was like we went to the NCAA tournament every year, and at the end of every year, you come back into the locker room, and they would talk about the hope and everything, and how everybody's going to be better the following year, and it was just kind of those momentous times when you start things and when you end things. I think was always kind of neat, to watch him, and I would always kind of want to watch his emotions and kind of how he handled those times. And I remember after we won the championship, I always say to all the people that the weirdest thing after the championship was there was no one else to play, because you played the next game and you finally lost, and then you would go home and, it would be ready for the next season. But I remember after we beat Georgetown, that feeling of like, okay, who's next? And there wasn't anybody next. And that was really an unbelievable feeling. And I know, just something that, you never forget.
One other instance was that's will never leave me is after tryouts my freshman year. I think I was like most kids, you leave home and you just don't get a haircut. You just kind of, you're on your own, routine. And, so I make the team, and he turns and looks at me and he goes, get a haircut before tomorrow or don't come back. And I was like at Villanova, and I'm like, I didn't even know where to get a haircut, but I found out real quick and got a haircut the next morning before I showed up at practice. But it was like, I think of that moment. It's like that moment literally changed my life in so many ways.
Ars, talk about
the other thing's got to be what you were talking about earlier, Chuck, though, too, is for me is that, beating North Carolina and going into the Final Four, right?
Yeah.
Just a once in a lifetime moment in a father-son life. I mean, just something you could never recreate. And something that I still have a big picture on my wall in my office of the two of us hugging that you were just talking about, Chuck. Just an unbelievable moment in a child-father life.
Yeah, there's so many little things. I mean, we've experienced just about everything you can go through as a team, but between having a death on the team with Jake and Coach's mom, opening a new arena, closing an arena, winning big games, losing big games, winning the national championship. There really wasn't anything that you can do team-wise that we didn't accomplish with him. Talk about.
Hey, Chuck, I got to give Sonny one other one. I mean, I got like things going through my head, but I got to tell you, playing Syracuse at Syracuse and getting, I mean, what year was that? Were we sophomores, Chuck? I think we were sophomores.
Sophomore, Jim. It was either the championship.
I mean, Syracuse absolutely kicking our ass, right? I mean, making us look like fools at the Dome, and we come in at halftime, and he goes down the entire team, and you stink, Everson, and you stink, Pickney, and you're Dwayne McClain. You think you're a player, you're a puss, and jumping up and down at everybody, and yelling RC. You can't even get off the bench and yelling at me, and then he punches the blackboard.
Yeah.
And the two legs of the blackboard go out, and the whole thing crashes.
Yeah.
And we're all looking at each other like, holy shit, we better play the second half. I'm just saying that story because that was something I'll never forget. And that was
scary because I thought he was going to have a heart attack. It was scary.
Oh my gosh. He was so mad just because he felt like the guys weren't working hard,
Yeah.
So, and you talk about an equal opportunity, offender. He went down. It didn't matter whether you played, those 20 minutes or not. He went down everybody on the team, and you need to work harder, and you need to figure yourself out. You need to do, and that was an all-time halftime.
You know what's the beauty of the Big East? You're talking about going to Syracuse and getting thumped, and I'm talking about going into Palestra and getting thumped as well, and probably the same year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just that's how the Big East was.
Yeah.
Right. So, Ars, and Brian, talk about we win the national championship, okay? And then the following year there was big talk of Coach going to the New Jersey Nets as the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through that whole thing, and we had a little team meeting. And as captains that year, you and I, we had a little team meeting and talked it out with them. Talk about what that was like, and how, any other coach, I don't even think any other coach would have been receptive to having 15 guys knock on the door and say, hey, we need to talk about that on the deck in the backyard of his house.
You're talking after, yeah. I'm sorry.
I'm talking about when he was debating or not whether he should take the New Jersey Net job, and we all showed up at the house. The captains all got together and said, "Hey, we need to go talk to him," because it looked like it was a done deal at that point. Talk about that period of time, what we did, and how he responded. When he made his announcement.
I think that was a really difficult time for him because, he didn't really know, what he was going to do. And I think, being the New Jersey kid, it was kind of like a dream come true for him to be able to have a chance, an opportunity to be the Nets coach. Something that I think, he always thought in the back of his mind was something he may not be able to achieve. And then when he was offered the job, I think he really felt like, it was something that he needed to take. And then, like Chuck said, everybody came to the house, and that was a really difficult thing for him. Seeing all the guys, and it was like a funeral, if you remember, Chuck. I mean,
oh yeah, it was tough.
Everybody's sitting on the deck and talking to each other and talking to him, and him kind of going one-on-one with all the guys and discussing, why they thought he should stay, or why they, the only reason they came to Villanova was because of him, and, the dedication that he's shown them, and the fact that they were dedicated to him. And it was a really difficult thing for him. And as it turned out, he ended up not being able to. I mean, he had basically taken that position.
Yeah.
And wakes up the next morning and calls the guy who was his accountant agent, if you called it an agent back in those days, Carl Hirsch, I believe, and told Carl, I don't think I can do this thing. He's saying, what do you mean? So, they were supposed to have a press conference like in 2 hours, and he's telling them, I don't think I can do it. And he didn't do it because of the love of the guys, and the fact that I think he just felt like that's not really who he was. I mean, he was about family, and he was about the guys. And I think he thought, in the end, I'm going to regret this because I can't leave these kids. And I don't think he ever really looked back after that. I mean, I think he felt he made the right decision. He made a decision that he had to make for his family, meaning his Villanova family. And yeah, that was really it. That was a tough few days for him.
Yep.
I got to ask you, because Chuck has talked about this often, and we've had other guys on, and they have talked about it as well, between D-Train and Dwight and the two Heralds. The trips to when your dad got the job in Florida at Northwood, then I think Kaiser, right? The team, it became a yearly reunion. And I know Chuck talked about it mostly because of the food, but he also mentioned, now he also talked about, again, it's really just an extension of family. So, talk about, like, Brian and RC, both of you, just talk a little bit about how that whole thing came about and how it's just in the fabric of your lives. So talk about that.
That's a good question for Brian and Chuck more than me to start, just because they're the ones that started it. So they should talk about that.
Okay, Brian, you're up.
Yeah, I'm happy. It's and it was Chuck's idea. Chuck called me and he said, what do you think about going down and seeing Coach and Mrs. Mass? We're talking a lot about Coach tonight, but Mrs. Mass was as influential in my life, and I'm sure Chuck's is, and the rest of the guys as Coach was in her own way. But he, Chuck said, let's go down. And I'd been talking to Coach on and off for a bunch of years, but it was like, yeah, let's go do this. And so we went down. I think the first year, Chuck, it was just you and I. We went down for like 3 or 4 days and hung out with them, and it was just so much fun. And it was during his season. It was, Super Bowl weekend. So we got to go to a couple of games. And, back then his, when he was at Northwood, the crowds weren't really big, but in the stands were Chuck Daly, Bobby Orr, Bob Greasy. Like, he had all his boys, and, and Billy Cunningham and Bill Raftery. Like, like Northwood didn't know what to do. I mean, they had a Hall of Fame coming to their games, once a week, from various sports. So anyway, we Chuck started this tradition. I jumped on it immediately. And then, we brought other guys in judiciously because we had to check with Mrs. Mass first on who was, how we could expand the circle.
She vetted them.
She was the gatekeeper, and rightfully so, because we were intruding on her, her home.
Absolutely.
And coach was like, everybody, just bring everybody. And quite frankly, there was, those early years, Chuck and I really didn't want to share, he and Mrs. Mass with too many people. But then it got to be such a great thing for all of us. We were having 14, 15 guys, not only players, but coaches, managers, it was just so much fun.
And the best part about that, Brian, it was like a big fraternity house, Sonny. Because like we would all stay at his house. So Brian and I, because we were the first ones that put everything together, we got the pick of our rooms. There was I called it the Brady Bunch room. There was a bedroom, and in the middle was the bathroom. Brian
Jack and Jill bathroom. Yeah.
So Brian had one side, I had the other, and then everybody else got wherever they could find a couch or a place on the floor. And the last time we were all together, and usually it was, you go down on a Thursday, guys would start arriving, and we would just come in and have a little, maybe a wine thing and sit out in the backyard and swap stories and just hang, Then Friday we'd have a big, a cocktail party, and then he would kick everybody out of the house except for the team. And we'd have a big pasta dinner, and RC was cooking the veal chops, and mom had the pasta going, and the eggplant sandwiches. And we had the whole nine, Sonny. As a fellow Italian, you would have loved sitting at
my stomach. You might hear it in a couple of minutes.
And then what happens is we go around the table and talk about what's going on with each other, because he was interested in what's going on with our kids and our families, our wives, and things like that. The next day was a game, and then Sunday was the Super Bowl, and then we'd all catch the red eye coming back. But it was the best parts of that were sitting in the backyard with him and telling him stories. Some he knew and some he didn't know, about what happened on the road on this trip, or what happened behind the scenes on this trip. And it was just the laughter and the camaraderie between all those guys, and it was never the same group. There was a kind of a core group, and then it built up. And then the last time we saw him on that Florida visit, as Brian said, we had 14 or 15 guys, and if we didn't have enough room in the house, he would call neighbors, and kick them out of their house, and they would stay at the neighbor's house too.
Yeah, that's right. That's the truth.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was hey, Brian, one of the stories we have to tell, Sonny, is we got there early. It was Dwayne, myself, and Brian, and we went to Duffy's Sports Bar, which is a place that we would go at post game.
Yeah.
And we went after practice, right? You want to jump in, Brian?
No, because I'm not quite. There's so many. I'm not quite sure.
So Brian and Coach are walking across the street.
Oh, that one. Oh, okay.
Brian and Coach are walking across the street, and Sonny, here comes a guy. He starts to speed up the car. He's doing about 25 miles an hour at least in the parking lot.
Yeah. So I take it. So Sonny, we just we were there for just a little bit. We were pre-gaming before we were going to the to have dinner.
Road sodas. Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
So I've got my arm around Coach, and we're just walking across the street to our car, which is across 20 feet away, and this guy comes around the corner, and I look, and he wasn't stopping. He hit us both, and we both go up on the hood of the car onto the windshield. The guy brakes, and we both go down on the ground, and I'm like, oh my God, Coach is dead. It's like, because this guy was moving pretty good.
He had to be like 78 at that point, right?
Yeah.
And he had a Chivas Regal glass in his hands.
Yeah.
And didn't spill a drop, by the way.
And he popped up, and I was like, whoa. I knew adrenaline was flowing, but I was like, but he was, I will never forget that story.
So now people are gathering, and they're telling him, hey, Coach, we got to call an ambulance. He goes, I'm all right. He goes, I got to get home. Mom's got the pot on. And he goes, I like my pasta al dente. He goes, if we wait around for the ambulance, it's going to be mush. We got to go.
Mushad, yeah, you don't want a mushad, yeah.
And went home, you know. And the next day he gets up and he's screaming at Brian and I, come on, you're going to make me late. So he's up before us.
Yeah.
We go in the locker room pregame.
Yeah.
And he says, hey, I tell you right now, I'm the toughest son of a gun in the room. He goes, right, Chuck? And I go, hey, guys, you better listen to him. Coach took a charge on a Toyota last night. And so if it was me, I'd be diving on the floor and doing everything you have to do what you got to do, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Brian, so you got that glass there, right, Brian? That's a toast for that one right
yeah,
there.
that's a toast for Coach. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So
I guess I would like to end with one thought, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Just talk about what is the biggest thing that Coach left inside of you?
Oof.
wow, stumped you guys.
Yeah. You know, it sounds trite, but never give up. Never give up. It's like you just compete. And if you compete, you know, good things will happen, whether it's in sports or in the, you know, in your business. And the other side of that was his compassion. You know, the guy is viewed, you see the clips, he's viewed as this great competitor, but there was a great compassion to the man that he had for people and wanted to help them and would really go out of his way. You know, there were times where I know, you know, RC, you guys might not have felt it, but you know, he had to sacrifice some home time for everybody that he helped, you know, because he was just helping so many people. And that doesn't mean he was neglecting anybody at home, but he had a great passion and compassion in him that I wish more people knew about.
Yeah, I mean, I got goosebumps literally just listening to you guys. So, RC, go ahead.
I think to compete is a great word. He used that word with my kids often, as well as myself. With, you know, I started a business 20 years ago, and he was so proud of that, and it was all about competing. And I have a son who's, you know, he is a professional golfer trying to make it, and he used to talk to him. He wrote him a letter. So this is a good little story, side story, but he wrote him a letter every day. And it was just like 3 sentences every day for a month, just about competing, about working hard, about being the best, about being the elephant in the room. Do you want to be the elephant or do you want to be the mouse? Those are just to try to just a little bit of motivation. And my son, when my father was dying, he read back those 30 days. It was really an unbelievable thing. And still to this day, he keeps those letters with him when he's on the road or going places. So it's that there's the compassion thing, right? And that's also the compete thing, like Brian was just talking. And then my other thing would really be, you know, really just the loyalty thing. You know, loyalty to him was one of the top, you know, 3 or 4 things in his life. You know, it was loyalty to family, loyalty to your mother and father. Every time I walked out, Sonny, every time I walked out when I was a young man walking out of the door of my house, he would say to me, remember who you are and what you represent. And I always say that to Mike, remember who you are and what you represent. And that was kind of him in a nutshell, and what he tried to teach the people around him is that's really what's most important in life. And that's the kind of stuff that I look back on all the time.
Yeah, and to add to that, guys, I would also say, you know, enthusiasm too. He signed all his letters that he wrote to recruits or anybody enthusiastically, Rolly Massimino. You know, so nothing great was ever accomplished without enthusiasm. That was another thing that he instilled in us, along with the family and the loyalty and, you know, all the core values that, I mean, that have shaped all of us into the fathers we've become, the coaches, if we coach kids, and, you know, the people that we are, has a big, huge part to do with Coach Massimino. And it's funny because I tell people all the time, I hear 2 voices coming out of my mouth when I talk to my kids, or whether I'm coaching like you did, Sonny, and we've coached against each other a couple of times. And, you know, I hear my dad and Coach Mass. all the time. So that's how big of an influence it was. And when he said it was family, he meant that right up until the end, because Brian and I were both there with the Massimino family right to the very end. And there's nothing better that you can say than having that kind of relationship with the guy that was supposed to be your coach, but wound up being so much more to so many people than just that, you know. So that's what I would say.
Well, I can say that after he's passed, you guys are going to see it in your children every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yep. That's great.
So, all right. So before let's leave on a high note. RC, you know, and Bri, give us your best Coach Mass story. One that'll make us smile, one that'll make us laugh, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right. Well, you think about it, Ars. The one that jumps into my mind was when I was a grad assistant, and you know, work hard, play hard, right? I drove him to a camp out in the Poconos, and it was it seemed like it was 110 degrees out. And he looked at me, and actually John Branca, Wolfie, was with us. And we have this Villanova basketball van we're driving, and he gives us like $60. And he says, go buy 3 bathing suits and a case of beer. He goes, because when we're done, I know there's a lake near here. And we're going to go swimming in the lake, and we're going to have a couple of beers, and then we're going to go home. And, you know, he came out of, you know, talking in that heat after, you know, being in 100+ degrees. And we went and we just kind of floated around this lake in Pennsylvania, and he told stories. And it was like, I remember it like it was yesterday, and we laughed a long time. So he knew how to, you know, he worked hard, but he knew how to play a little bit too.
What do you got, Ars?
I'm having trouble with that one, Chuck.
There's so many.
Yeah.
You want me to help you?
Yeah.
I'll bail you. I'll bail you out. You know, Sonny, I've told you this one on. We're playing in Providence my senior year, and I'm just getting abused by the guy in the second row about, you know, are you ever going to play, or what's going on? How come you're not in the game? Why? So I'm jarring back at the guy. You know, now I'm talking to him to his wife is sitting with him. I said, what are you doing with that guy? You know, why are you with why aren't you with a more handsome guy? What are you doing with that guy? So coach comes down in the middle of the game. He comes down, he goes, Chuck, what the hell is going on down here? What's all the commotion? I said, this guy is breaking my balls. He goes, which guy? I go, this guy right here. He goes, hey, pal. He reaches in his pocket. He picks out a quarter. He flips it to the guy. He goes, call somebody who gives a damn. And he high fives me and keeps coaching the game like it never stopped, never blinked, nothing. Just kept going. It's unbelievable. You know, there's a million of them now that you can see. So
I love it. That's one of my favorites. That's great.
Yeah, listen, I appreciate both you guys coming out and spending time talking about Coach. I know. You know, sometimes it's bittersweet, but it's always great when we can sit down together and have these types of conversations. Ars, I appreciate you sharing your dad and your mom with all of us for all of these years.
Oh, it was great.
You know, you and your whole family.
They love you guys.
I mean, it's special. And, you know, and it's funny because Sonny and I joke around and tease and everything, but Sonny knows, you know, being having his Italian heritage as well, what it really means to have the family and have the relationships that we have to this day and going forward. I'm sure it's not stopping now. It just keeps going, you know, and, you know, for you to share both your mom and dad like that with all of us and never once complained or anything was really awesome.
Very generous. Very generous.
Very generous. So
you and your siblings.
Well, you know how much they loved everybody. So.
Well, so thank you for a very, very special episode of the Big East Rewind. The Big East Rewind is produced and directed by Nick Corus and Daryl Gurney. You could reach us on bigeastrewind@gmail.com if you have any questions or suggestions. We're up for all of that. Sonny and I are very good about responding to those. Check us out on YouTube, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and also wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great night.
Ease up, buddies.
Hey, guys. Thank you.